Hello everyone and welcome. Today it's a new appointment and it's also the last appointment of our DATEV trilogy. 2 weeks ago in the last appointment, together with me, we have analyzed the technical details of building a DATEV integration. We have together understood the different DATEV services and API product. We have understood the sandbox and production approval to go live with your integration. And today, now that the theory has been clarified, we want to jump into the practice. That's why the plan of the day is to create booking proposal in DATEV Unternehmen Online using the DATEV Rechnungsdatenservice 1.0. So just to refresh our mind, the Rechnungsdatenservice is this service that allows you to basically create and upload structured data into DATEV Unternehmen Online. And this structured data must be converted into an XML. So this will be the goal of the day, to create this structured data inside DATEV Unternehmen Online that represent a booking proposal. In the first part, I will walk you through the all DATEV endpoints we need to make this happen. And in the second part, I will show you our simplified approach to make the same scenario, so to reach the same goal, but using the Meso Unified API. So this is our agenda. I will say, let's jump into it. I will share with you my screen. Perfect, here we are. So as you can see here, this is my Postman, and there are two collections. So the first collection is the DATEV collection with all the needed endpoints to upload this structured data to DATEV Unternehmen Online. So this is the first endpoint, and of course this is the endpoint for the authentication. In this endpoint, we need to, of course, define some information in order to go through the authentication process. We need to set up the grant type, authorization code with PKCE. Then we have to provide authentication URL and access token URL. This is the one that we use for Sandbox. If you want to use the one for production, DATEV documentation provides all the URLs you need. Then you will need to provide the client ID and secret of your application, so the one that you have created in the DATEV developer portal. We need to set the code challenge method, send a state string, and then define the scopes of this request. So the scopes are OpenID and profile that are always required because DATEV needs so. Then we have account ID that it's optional. And then we have the counting DXSO jobs, that is the scope needed for the Rechnungsdatenservice, so to upload structured data. And then we have also the client scopes, so the DATEV accounting clients and accounting clients read. These are also needed because, as we will see in a while, for each API call we make to DATEV, we have to provide a parameter in the request, that is the client ID of the user. And we will have a look on it in a while. So with this endpoint, with this call, we get an access token for the user. This access token is valid for 15 minutes. So that's why for each access token, a refresh token is generated. And you can, after 15 minutes, refresh the access token using the refresh token using this API call. So this is the API call, the URL that you will need to do. It's a post. You will provide the grant type refresh token, the refresh token itself here, and you can refresh the access token. The refresh is only valid for a maximum of 11 hours, but an unlimited number of refresh tokens can be generated in the 11-hour period starting from the generation of the first access token. So this is, of course, positive because we can generate as many refresh tokens as we want, but for only 11 hours. So after 11 hours, the user must re-authenticate. That's why DATEV provide a second option for the login. In this second option, the refresh token will have a validity of 2 years, not anymore 11 hours. So to access this authentication, so to make this authentication, we will just need to add some scopes in the request. So this is the request for the authentication. And the parameters are the same. What it changed is the scope. So in the scope, we have the previous parameter, so the previous scopes plus the offline scope and this scope here. This scope is fundamental, and this consultant number and client number must be provided from the user before to log in. Because with this authentication, we get a token that it's connected to the client that is here defined. So the client is a combination of consultant number and client number together. So together they represent the client ID for a user. But what is this client ID? Well, it's a value. Actually, we can have multiple client IDs in our account, and it represents, I will say, the company. So companies that are associated to such account. So it's nothing to do with the client ID of our developer application, but it's a value that belongs to the user that is authenticated. And he can have multiple clients ID. So when we want to use this method, the user must provide to us first the client ID he choose, and then we can get the access token that expires after 2 years. So now that we understood how authentication works, we can keep going. So the next API call to do is the get clients. But before to analyze it, we have to define and clarify something. So the reason why we need to make this API call is because for each further API calls that we will do, so to upload our structured data, we need for each API call provide a client ID. So this client IDs that belongs to the user account. So the user must choose which client ID he want to use for the next API calls. So which company, I would say, he choose to upload his data. If we are authenticating the user with the long token, in that case, the get clients endpoint, it's not needed and cannot be done actually. This is because the long token, as already mentioned, it's connected to an already specific client. So we already know which client ID the user has chosen. So there is no need to get all other the clients. But if we are using the short authentication, then we have to provide a way to the user to choose the client ID that we will need in the next API calls. So that's why we have this clients endpoint. This is the URL. We have to provide the token that we have. We have to provide this header. So this is the important because we have to provide this value that is the client ID in this case of our application in the web developer portal. So with this call, we get a response that looks like the following. So this is the response from the test sandbox account. So if you authenticate using the test sandbox account and you make this call with such token generated, you get this response. So these are all the clients ID that are available in the test sandbox account, and we have to choose one that will be used in the next API calls. So the next API call is to get client by ID. This is basically the same call as the previous one, but adding the client ID that we have chosen as path variable. This endpoint, it's fundamental because with this endpoint, we check the configuration of this client that we have chosen to understand if it's ready for this client to upload data to that internal online. So we have to do this check on the client. We provide as well the header here and our application client ID, and we get a response that looks like this. So this is the configuration of this first client ID. What is important here is to check first if the value is document management available. It's true because it tells you if this client ID or if with this client ID you can actually upload the data to that entertainment online. And if so, you have to check if there are available fiscal year. And for such fiscal year, you have to check if the account payables or account receivable or cash ledger are available. In our case, we want to upload to DATEV cash entries. So we have to check if the cash ledger is available. As you can see here, the fiscal year 2025, it's the unique fiscal year that it's accessible. And for this, the cash ledger is available. So this means that we can upload structured data that are cash entries to DATEV Unternehmen Online, but only for the fiscal year 2025. So now we can keep going. We want to start to actually upload this data to DATEV Unternehmen Online. So the first endpoint would be this. With this endpoint, that is a post, we are providing the client ID that we have chosen as path variables, authorization, headers, and post. With this request, we are creating a job, a task, that will be the task where we will attach our files and we will process, so in an asynchronous way. In this post request, the body, it's the following one. We have to provide the accounting month. So there will be a month in the fiscal year that we have mentioned before, so 2025, since it's the only one available. And import type. So we want to specify that we are importing cash entries. In this way, we create a job that allows us to upload data that are cash entries in 2025 year. The response will look like this. So we will get this response from a test sandbox account that is a static response. So as you can see here, we have Eingangsrechnung that is not really our scenario. So we have chosen the cash ledger, not the account receivable or account payable ledger. But the reason why is this value here is because it's a static response. So we get always this one. To get real data, we have to use real users. This response was really important is the ID. This is the ID of the job that we are about to process, and we need this ID for the next API calls. So now that we have an ID, we want to attach to this ID, so to this job, our structured data. So this is the API call to do. It's the same URL of the previous one, but with files. It's a post. Here we provide the client ID and job ID, the token, the header as usual, and the body. The body needs a file name, so the name of the file that we're about to upload, and the file itself. That must be as an XML, so we have to attach, so we have to generate this XML with our data. But how this looks like, I can show to you. So this is an example of the XML that DATEV requires in input. And here, in this XML, we have provided some data that represents our entry, our cash entry. So with this API call, providing XML and the file name, we can upload the file to the job. And the response will be actually empty with a status, so it will be like that with status 201. Let's say that now we want to upload not only structured data, but also some PDFs. Then to do so, we have to remake the same call. So here, I have already prepared it with client ID and job ID, but in the body, we have to provide a different file name and a different file, so the PDF that we want to attach. So for each file or structured data we want to attach, we have to make this API call. So now we have done with our documents, so with our files, but it's not over. It's not over because at this point, DATEV needs you to upload to the job another file that must be called document.xml, that must contain metadata information, so general information regarding the file we have just uploaded. So we have to generate this XML and upload as well to DATEV. We can do it here. Oops. This is the third call. And you can see here we have file name document XML, and this is the file that is the metadata file. But how it looks like, well, I can show you here. So this is the XML that represents the document metadata. And here, as you can see, there are information regarding the file we have just uploaded. So the XML and the PDF. So with this, we send a request and we get an empty response with status 201. So now we are ready to process the job. So we jump in the next call, that is a put. We provide the client ID, the job ID. We provide a body with this JSON where we say ready equal to true. So we are ready to process, and we execute. The response is always empty, but in this case, the status is 204. So if it's 204, we understand, okay, the processing has started. If now we want to check the status of our request, we jump on the get status request. This is the URL. Here we have client ID and job ID as usual, authorization, header, and no body. And the response will be like this. So we'll get the ID of our job ID in the response and the status of the request. The status could be a value from 1 to 5, and each number means something. In this case, 4 means that the processing has happened, but there are some errors. But be aware that we are getting 4 because, as I said, basically the test sandbox account provides static data that are always the same. They are not real. So even if you are correctly uploading data or calling the API in the right way, you will get always status 4 from the sandbox. So testing with real user will be needed to see, of course, other outputs. So now the sandbox tell me, okay, there are some errors. I want to check these errors. I will call the last endpoint, that is to get the details. This is the endpoint, and we provide as usual client ID and job ID. And the response is the following. Is as usual static, so always the same. And it looks like this. So it is telling you what is going on in the process, so which document have been uploaded, if there are some errors or if not. So this is how the process of upload booking proposal as structured data in DATEV Unternehmen Online works. So let's now see instead our simplified approach to reach the same goal, so to do the same but using the Mesa Unified API. So here is a collection. You only need 4 endpoints to do so, to reach the same goal. So let's have a look. We have the first endpoint. This endpoint is for authentication purpose. With this endpoint, you can authenticate your user to a specific target system. And this endpoint retrieves you a URL, and that this URL brings the user through the whole authentication process for the target system. And to make this API call, you need to provide an API key. This API key is actually provided by us to you when you start to use our unified API. So you only need this API key, set this URL, and you can start. The target system for DATEV is sandbox DATEV UO sandbox, and executing this will retrieve me the URL that I explained you before. So this is the URL. If we take this, we are going here, we are okay pasting the URL. So we have the login page of DATEV. We choose DATEV Benutzer Konto, so that is the method to authenticate the test sandbox account. Here I already saved the test sandbox account username and password. I log in, I grant the permission, of course, to access the user data. And then I get this key. This key represents a unique key for your user that has been authenticated to DATEV. And you need to save this key because you will need for all the next API calls your API key and the account key of the user. So we are back to our Postman. We have the access token of the user. Actually, this access token is the short one, so it expires after 11 hours, but we also provide the chance for the users, and so for our customer, to authenticate the users and getting a long access token. In this scenario, then you will need to, so the customer will need to use not the DATEV or sandbox target system, but it will be DATEV or sandbox long token. So you just need, in this scenario, to change the target system and provide the company ID as query parameter. That is the client ID we have discussed before. So the user must provide first to you the company ID, so this client ID in his system. And with this information, we can get the long access token. So now this is for the authentication. We want to keep going. And the next endpoint is the get companies. Of course, if you are authenticating the user with the long authentication, you don't need to get the companies, because as before, we already know which is the company ID that the user has chosen. So we can skip the get companies. But if we are authenticating the user with a different one, so with a different, so the short one, then in that case, we have to get the company. So we can jump here. This is the endpoint. The endpoint has the header. This is the API key, your API key, and this is the account key, the one that we have just generated. This is the account key. We just need to execute. As you can see here, we get the client IDs of the test sandbox account, and we just need to choose one and keep going. So the next endpoint is the create expense endpoint, this third one. And this third one allows you to upload your structured data as JSON inside the DATEV Tournament Online. This requires the company ID that we have just got from the get companies as query parameter, and it needs the API key and the account key of the user, and requires a body. So let's just take the client ID, the first one, and provide this here. Let's jump to the body. So in this body, we have two values. We have the expense and we have the files. So in the expense, you will need to provide a JSON that looks like this. That is the request body of this API call. And here you need to provide your information. So the same information we have provided to the XML before. And there is also another value, another option in this form data, that is files. So here you can also upload files that you want to attach together with the structured data. So this is what you need to provide. That's what we did before, but with different steps. So in this case, it's just one step. So we have the authentication, we have the company ID, you just need to execute. So in the response, we just provide the body with the data that we got in input, plus the task ID, so the ID of the job that we have created and processed. So what has happened behind this? Behind this call, actually, we have first checked if the company you have provided can upload the data to that Tournament Online. If so, we have then generated the XML of your expense. We have validated the XML, and then we have created, if so, if the XML was successful, we have created the job, we have attached the XML, we have attached the file, we have attached the document XML and generated it for you, and then we have processed the job. So now the processing has started, we got the ID in the response, we just need to check the status of it. So we have the ID, we just jump in the last call, that is to check everything. We provide the task ID, we provide the company ID, and then we provide the here our key. We just get the response. Here we are. This is the response, and as you can see, we have the status that is not anymore a number, but it's a string. So we combine, so we describe each status what means and provide the string in output, plus the details of the processing. So as you can see, we have basically implemented the whole scenario, but with less endpoint and in an easier way. So this is actually our simplified approach to this use case. So this was our short demo. I will say we have just arrived to an end for today. Let's get back to the main part. So we have seen today, we have analyzed today the flow that you need to generate, so to build in order to create this structured data and upload them to DATEV Internet Online. We have seen it using the DATEV endpoints, and we have seen it using the Mason Unified API approach. Of course, if you want to test with real users, you will need to go through the approval process that I described you the last appointment. But using our unified API will give you an easy access to production because our endpoint have already been approved. So using our endpoint, it's already a guarantee for you. So you won't need to go through the approval process, but would be a white label process. So you will get access to production in an easier and faster way. So I hope that everything is clear. I hope that this appointment could be helpful to you. And if you have further questions, or if you want to share with us your DATEV challenges or your DATEV integration strategy, let's get in touch. So thank you very much for your time and have a great evening.